Hey y'all, happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another live episode of Tech Backstage. Really short week this week, just today and tomorrow, because we're going to be off for Thanksgiving on Thursday. But wanted to welcome my guest to the show, Albert Saniger, CEO at Nate. Albert, how you doing?
I'm good, Eddie. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. Excited to jump in and talk all things shopping and shopping identity. Really quick, I'd love to just hear a little bit about your backstory and how you came to be the CEO at Nate.
Yeah, so I've been a founder most of my life. I was born in Spain, and I grew up sort of between Spain and France, and then I moved to California for college, and I've been living in New York City for 10 years or so. Um, I, my first company was actually I was a retailer. I started selling T-shirts, and I was one of the first sort of Shopify customers back in 2012, building a direct-to-consumer business, even though I wasn't necessarily coining that term. Um, and I sold that business a few years later and went to business school. And after that, I worked at Amazon, and that was a shock of an experience for me because I had been building really small businesses before, and then getting to work at one of the largest companies in the world by market cap was absolutely insane. So I left Amazon in 2018, and I decided to start Nate, which is the company I run today.
Cool, awesome. Sorry, we're just talking about Carlos is wondering if it's coming from you or from me because I have very frequently the ambulance noise behind myself as well.
Oh, I think it was
Uh,
mine actually. This is Park
yeah,
Avenue South. Welcome to New York. Like, we're gonna have to deal
yeah.
with this for the next 30 minutes. Sorry for that.
Yeah. No, it's all good, man. Anyways, cool. So, and then at Nate, one of the things I just want to like briefly touch on, you, I love first and foremost that you were one of the first, like one of the first clients at Shopify, because that's the e-commerce movement itself has been such a transformative movement. Um, it's revolutionized the way that people, do business. And then also at Amazon, which is another groundbreaking company that, revolutionizes the way that people buy products, right? Um,
Yeah.
but kind of like quickly looking at all the good that those things that those companies have done, and the types of disruptive technology that they've created, that also kind of brings on the dark side, uh kind of these, I don't know if you call them unintended issues, or they're just things that we didn't really, I guess, that's one of the problems with disruptive technology, right? Is like you don't know what the problems are, because
Yeah.
they're not things that you've dealt with before, right? So we got Shopify and we got Amazon, and everybody's like, all right, I can just go buy this stuff online. But now all of a sudden, we're kind of getting into this, hey, I think you said it really eloquently backstage, is like you buy something and everybody knows that you bought it and there's no way around it, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
uh I'm interested to hear a little bit, just kind of briefly diving into the topic, which today we're talking about shopping identity. And I'd love to kind of like define that versus who the actual shopper and the shopper identity is in a second. But would love to hear your thoughts on just kind of like the evolution of e-commerce and purchasing things digitally, and how that's changed since you were, one of Shopify's first customers.
Yeah. Yeah. So there was a time when you could, there was no online shopping, right? You wanted to buy an item, and then you physically walk to a store. There was a time when you didn't even like swipe a credit card, right? You carried cash for the most part, and then there was an exchange there, and then nobody knew that you bought that. Maybe the people who were in that store at the time, or they were like stalking you, but that was it, really, right? And then we started saying, okay, is there a way to make this easy for this person at the point of sale? Is there a way to make this where the person doesn't have to go anywhere to buy something? And those things are awesome, right? And then, unfortunately, the unintended consequence is right now anything we do is leaving a trail. right? So global e-commerce is $5 trillion. And in the US specifically, that's like almost $1 trillion this year. So it's insane. Like a lot of people, in fact, like a lot of people, like more than half of it is on your phone. It's mobile.
Yeah.
And the amount of information that is being stored on browsers, on card networks, on banks, payment systems, retailers, affiliated companies that like buy data from other people, social networks, if that was how you got inspired by wanting to buy that. And so there are all these companies out there that are trying to create their version of Eddie. Who is Eddie, right? You know who you are. And the part of you that you want to share perhaps with your friends or with your family and say, hey, yeah, I bought this, or these are the things I'm interested in. Why not, right? But it shouldn't be that like all these different companies get your information. Otherwise, slow and steadily and without realizing, then we end up building a society in the West that ends up looking very similar to what's happening in the East in certain places that, perhaps like, consumer privacy has never been an issue or a core pillar of
Right.
the foundation of that economy, right?
Yeah.
And so that's very scary. And one of the questions I've been asking myself since I started this company is there a true trade-off? Is there a way to get people what they want, a seamless life, a social life, and at the same time stay in control of what they're buying, how they're buying it, how they're paying for it, when they're buying it, all that sort of like trail? Who owns that? Is there a way to make it where that agency is owned by the shopper? And that's sort of the question.
Yeah. I guess, I love that you were talking about, being stalkers at brick and mortars, because I think that's a word I relate to a lot recently, because like you'll go online and like you'll literally look at a product online, and then your Google feed for the next week is shoes or jackets or plane tickets. And it's like, do you think it was a gradual move from like, oh, hey, we can, advertise these people kind of passively, to kind of like this all out bloodbath of stalkers? Or, do you think it was like a really intentional move? Like, I mean, how do you think we got here?
Yeah, I don't think there was this one master architect that wants to eventually, build this one sort of like god for all things data, consumer data. I think slow and steadily, business model design drove some of those companies to try to make improvements on targeting, and that made it we're like, hey, wouldn't it be better if like you actually didn't see things that you were not interested in? Sure, like show me things that I might be interested in. And then like that gets coupled with this poor execution, right? Because first, like these algorithms, like first, they're not there. Even if they were there, they would need so much data for them to feed you the right information. And no matter how you cut it, that ends up with self-fulfilling prophecies and informational determinism. And you see it in politics these days. People are more and more polarized, right? Because you end up sort of in this one rabbit hole of these are the things that you clicked on, and then you end up getting sort of more and more of those things. So you end up sort of going down that path. And I haven't shared I'll share a personal story with you. My father, who passed away this year, started when he retired. He started watching one or two YouTube videos from these conspiracy theorists that were saying that COVID was fake or whatever they were saying. And my father has been this was this very rational sort of businessman, and then somehow those videos turn into other videos. It turned into other videos.
Mm-hmm.
So he thought that was the world, right? And he ended up believing a lot of that stuff. To the point where he actually, started ingesting this thing. It wasn't bleach, but it's something related. It's like one of those things. It's a sort of, because people said it was good or whatever. And the doctor told him, you should start doing that. This is going to harm your health. And, here we are now. I'm not necessarily linking that experience to the fact that he died, although I don't think it necessarily helped. And that's just one example in my close family. But I've been aware of this issue for a while. I've actually never been on Facebook products in my life. I'm one of those privacy junkies that always like
Yep.
deletes cookies, turns on VPNs and all that stuff. And so, no, I don't think anyone that architected this. I think like over time, people are like, okay, how do we make sure that we serve these customers better? And who are the customers? What are the advertisers that want to target Eddie? So how do we make sure that we reduce their CAC and like do hyper targeting? And then it turns out that because you're wearing a red T-shirt today, you'll end up just seeing red T-shirts and you will not see black T-shirts, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it becomes very sad and very sort of isolating.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, and I think there's that point too where like you talking about privacy, you even start to get paranoid because you'll like say something on the phone and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, are they listening to me as well? So it does get a little bit creepy, and I think it's, at the end of the day, like you said, I think it's really, this is just kind of the end of just super extreme A/B testing to see what's the best way to sell a product to an end user, right? Which brings us kind of full circle around to, talking about how can we reclaim data? How can we reclaim, our identity, our privacy, without necessarily sacrificing our basically our shopping preferences, or, what we, I think you can probably sum it up better than I can, but how do you think we can go about shifting from the economy that we're in right now towards being able to continue having meaningful experiences without needing to give over all of our data and all of our privacy?
Yeah. I mean, I'm all for using technology in the ways that make human life better. Now, better is this very vague term, right? And it may mean different things for different people, right? You may be that kind of person who wants to go to a restaurant and be told, hey, Eddie, based on your, whatever your Fitbit is telling us, the restaurant people, you should eat chicken today. And that's fine if that's who you like. If you want to use that, maybe you only do it like once a year, once a month, or every week, whatever you want, right? And some people may not be into that at all, and they just want to feel their own body and go to a restaurant and open the menu and be excited. And at the end of the day, what I'm questioning here is not whether we should use technology in one way or another, is who is the owner of that information. In other words, who owns that information that is being collected about you? Is there, and so if I told you today, okay, in order to prevent all this tracking when you buy things online, you have to, every time you buy something, go and turn on a VPN, then go to an incognito browser, open an incognito browser, go and try to generate a single-use virtual credit card. Maybe your bank allows you to do that. Maybe use a third-party service. Close that incognito browser, swap the VPN to a different VPN, go back to the browser, open a new incognito browser, and then try to place the order with your information. You'd be like, wait, I have to do this every single time, right?
Yep.
And like you end up giving up because like you want a seamless life, right? And so slow and steady, we're like, driving towards a world where these machines will end up just deciding everything, and we'll just be the executors in a way. Like, and this is like, it sounds futuristic and dystopian, but it's actually happening today in China already. There are some companies that are able to predict with 90% accuracy what somebody's going to buy 48 hours before they buy it. And in order to offer one-day shipping, they start shipping the item 48 hours before the consumer has bought it, because China is geographically so large. And so it sounds dystopian, but it's actually happening today, right? So I gave you that trade-off, right? Would you spend like, I see your reaction. You're like, wait, I don't want to live in that world at all, right?
No.
But you also do not want to spend like 15 minutes every time you need to buy something online doing all those things, right? Yep. And here's a different example. What if there are some people who are really, especially new generations. So the Nate shopper, like our consumer that uses Nate for the most part, these are young. This is a new generation of shoppers, people in their 20s. And they love sharing what they're interested in with their friends. And the method that they have to share that is on social networks that have a business model that is where they are the product as opposed to the customer, right?
Right.
And so even if you say, okay, I'm going to go out of my way to do all these like things, you're still going to want to share some of that stuff. Where do you share it, right? And who retains that information? So as a result of this, I want to have a seamless and social life. You end up having a world where, you know, the social network knows what you're buying, your browser knows what you're buying, your credit card company knows what you're buying, a bunch of third-party affiliate companies, and they start selling information to each other. And then like somebody mails to your house with your address some ad about, you know, new like direct-to-consumer cooking pans or pots or whatever it is, and you're like, I've never bought anything from this company in my life. How do they have my name and my actual address? Well, because, you know, people have been selling it to third parties. So that's sort of one of the things that I'm trying to resolve by building the company that I'm building. And if you, in case you or anyone who's listening today is not a Nate user, you can download the app today. And it's the simplest way of buying online ever. It's super seamless. There's no trade-off. It is also the most social way of buying online because you can share the shopping lists that you're interested in with your friends and they can follow them. And at the same time, you're the one that stays in absolute control of what you're buying, when you're buying it, and how you're paying for it. So all that exercise that I mentioned, like turn on VPN, opening your browser, generate a virtual card, all that stuff, we do all that in the back end. You don't have to worry about any of that. So do people use Nate app for privacy? Not necessarily. But in the process of us making it the most seamless and the most social way of buying online, people are preferring it over other places. And in the meantime, we're saying we're going to create a business model that makes it where we also give you the most private way of buying online. So slow and steady, you can reclaim your agency.
Yeah, I love that. I love, thinking about just kind of going back to, who owns the data, right? Because, for example, talking about going to the restaurant, the Fitbit with the chicken example, I love that Fitbit chicken. No, but like going back to that example, I think there's a really productive way to be able to do that without them obtaining and storing your data long term too, right? So because it's like you said, who owns the data? Well, it's like it's my data, and if like I know you're not going to abuse it, I'm open to sharing that information with you, right? So but kind of circling back over to what you guys are doing at Nate, is the intention to basically like guard my identity from merchants, or is kind of the eventual goal, because I have to imagine merchants probably aren't super stoked about that.
So the difference is merchants, retailers are actually unable to sell your personal identifiable information, as in your name, email, or shipping address. And we don't disintermediate you with the retailer. So when you use Nate to buy something, we place the order as if we were you. And then the retailer sends you a shipping confirmation the same way as if you had used your fingers to do that. The difference is that the purchase happens on our servers, not on your browser. So nobody can place a cookie on your browser saying that you bought that. We also issue a single-use virtual card for every purchase. And so nobody can map sort of your device, your IP address, your browser, like nobody can map all of that. And then the retailer cannot sell the last 4 digits of your card number because it's a single-use card to third parties. And the last 4 digits is how a lot of companies try to track you across places. That's what's happening today. And so it's actually the most private way of buying online today. The way I see this shaping up in the future, and you mentioned that you love the Fitbit and chicken, right? You're like, okay, I would love to try this. I'll see what the Fitbit says. Like, you'll go to the restaurant and they'll tell me what to eat. And that's cool, right? And the question is, do you, when you're done with them, like when you're like, you know what, I don't want you to have this data. I just wanted this experience. I wanted to eat here and have the experience, but I do not want you to store this data, right? You should be able to do that. Right? You should be able to say, I'm going to either lend it to you for 30 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour for some experience, and then I'm going to remove it, right? Or maybe you're the kind of person who you're like, you know what, I'm going to sell this data to you. Maybe if that's what you want. Why not? It should be your decision. And this applies to shopping too. I see a world where you eventually log into, let's say, your preferred streaming platform, and you share with them, for 10 minutes what you've bought online for the last 5 years. And if you want to share, or streaming as an example, you imagine a virtual reality world, or whatever other interface that you interact with, a voice assistant, right? And then at any point you're like, you know what, I'm not vibing with this anymore. I'm going to withdraw this right, and they will no longer have access to this information. That's the world that I want to build, that doesn't exist today. But there should be a way to get all the benefits that we want without the downside.
Is there just kind of a sidebar on that? Because you bring up a really interesting point, which is, hey, I want to expose this information right now because I see some benefit with sharing this particular part of my profile with this company, but at some point in the future, I want to rescind that permission, right? Is there any way that, like, in the future, you could see us being able to share that information with that future company and them not being able to take it, store it on their servers, run it through a gajillion algorithms, months or years after you rescind permission to view it, but also where they're not able to actually resell it to other companies?
Yeah. And of course, the law plays a big part in actually making sure that if we're able to build that future sort of like holds in case, people breach it without disclosing it. But I think there are new technologies out there that would allow for this to be sort of like entirely clean. And if you rescind that right, then effectively immediately that company would no longer have access to it. It all depends on how people build their stacks, right? But I think I'm already sensing that there are some companies that are on one side of the equation where they're like, I want a world where all the data is freely available for anybody to use. And there are some companies like Apple, for example, that are saying, you know what, I think this should be owned by the consumer. And so I think anyone who does business in the West is going to have to position themselves in one place or another, and then deal with the consequences after. And I consider consumer rights the right side of history in Western democracies.
Yeah, I agree, because like you're saying, it very closely aligns with what's happening in some, I guess we'll call them less than ideal countries. But the fact of the matter is, in countries like China, you don't really have the option to have that privacy, right? You walking down the street, I think they're working on facial recognition at this point, so they can actually track you from your house to your work, what time you leave, what time you enter, and they're not really concerned with whether that's your right or not, because you don't have those types of rights there. So I 100% agree with you. I think it's definitely on the right side of history. Again, I think it's another thing that when the internet came out, I don't think these are issues that anybody foresaw, or maybe, some people did, but I don't think the majority of regulators, which is kind of the next question I want to ask you about, but I don't think the majority of regulators saw this as becoming as big an issue as it is, because at the time, there wasn't even enough tech to do this. And now, here we are in 2022, and it's definitely something that's happening. But one thing I'd love to ask you about and just kind of get your opinion on is, so we're talking about laws and we're talking about regulators and GDPR, but what do you do when companies like Google or like Facebook, they're so big that they just ignore the regulations, because historically the punishments haven't been there, right? I think I read somewhere on some engineering blog how, like, at Google, like, an engineer saw a block of code that said, if consent, run the analytics function, else run the analytics function anyways. And so it's like things like that. It's like, there haven't historically been punishments that really fit the crime. So what are the regulators doing right now, and what direction do you see the law actually going to kind of curb this, this wild west that we have?
So there are a couple of entities that are ahead. You mentioned GDPR, so the European Union is definitely ahead. The state of California in the US is ahead, but they are barely scratching the surface. And they're building a lot of fundamentals on things that are not the most relevant things. So sure, your name and your address should be protected. What else though? If you click here or click there, right? Isn't that the equivalent of you going one place, going another place? What if like someone had the entire trail where you were going? I mean, it's sort of iPhone sort of does that, but like in theory, it's stored in the device, right? And so that's what's happening in the web. It's like, okay, like certain things are like the regulator is saying this is like requires consent, and the others are fair game. And the thing with the fair game part is that it's so large. The fair game part is so large that people can recreate whatever they need, right, in order to identify you, and then do and build. And so, and their business model is misaligned. So I think beyond your observation on like even the few sort of rules of the game are being broken and there's not enough sort of punishment. I think like there are not enough rules of the game. Like the rules of the game are completely outdated, and at this space, regulators are not going to catch up. And I think like the private sector has to, so businesses, corporations have to be a participant in this as opposed to be passive receivers of legislation. They have to say, this is my footprint, in the same way that they are being more open about their footprint on, let's say, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're being more open about their, climate footprint. They should also be open about, be basically tracking and measuring and disclosing what they're doing, and to protect consumers and their information. And so I think businesses have to play a key role here. I don't think this is just us going out in the streets and lobbying, government agencies to come up with new rules. Of course, that'll help, but businesses have to do it, and consumers and like people have to also be educate themselves a little bit more. And that has already happened. I see it a lot at this new generation. I tell you, like the Nate shopper is a very well-informed shopper. They grew up watching The Social Dilemma on Netflix. They're perfectly aware of where their data is going. And sometimes they actively say, okay, you know what? Sure, I'll be cool with this because that's my experience, because I don't have an alternative. But I'm actually optimistic because I see the new generations caring more about this. And then I see businesses on the right side of history. Regulators are far, far behind.
Okay, so you're basically, what you're saying is that we can't rely on the government. I mean, that shouldn't be surprising, but
not on the government alone. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's where companies like Nate are actually coming into the fold, and you guys are solving the problem. But there's also this other thing that you brought up, and we only got a couple minutes here, but maybe we can just kind of briefly touch on this. But like, this kind of requires people to really kind of, I guess, kind of like have good guy syndrome, right? Like, you really have to understand and agree that, like, look, maybe there's certain things that we're doing right now that we shouldn't be doing, right? And understanding, how do you holistically market to people that are interested in your products? How do you how do you get the word out there without having to scrape people's what they ate for lunch off the web, right? So there's the ethics side of it, right? And I think bottom line here is that companies that want to do this, companies like Nate, for example, it's an ethical decision. You guys are choosing to build this product because you believe in protecting people's identity and in allowing them to curate the experience that they want, not having companies dictate what they want them to see, right? But at the end of the day, this is an ethical question, and it really boils down to companies choosing to do the right thing. And like you said, being on the right side of history as we transition into this new future where we know that not everything should really be publicly available on the internet, right?
Yeah, that's right. But I would also argue that it can generate outsized returns. Like, I'm not building this company. I mean, I'm a a believer in the free market economy, and capitalism is awesome, and it's given me so much opportunity. I can build this business, raise money, hire people, build products that are helpful for society, and at the same time make money, right? And so I guess my point is, if you have a long-term horizon and you care about the footprint they are leaving, not just on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or on climate, but also on one of the fundamental pillars of Western democracies, which is privacy, then that will actually generate outsized returns. It'll generate a lot of value for the shareholders of those businesses. And it's paying off. I mean, look at Apple, right? Like when you accumulate that there's a bunch of examples like that. And so I think that the issue is when you look at things very sort of short term, and you think, okay, next quarter, the following quarter, how do I optimize this? How do I optimize that? And then that you enter these like weird, lines of reasoning, and these secondary unintended consequences that we were discussing at the beginning. But if you think about it long term, then that can generate really large returns for shareholders.
Albert, thanks so much for being on the show. I think we're a little bit over time, but really enlightening to hear the work that you guys are doing at Nate. And, it's good to hear that there's people out there trying to, really trying to solve this problem, because I think it's pervasive. And I think that, I think it reaches a lot farther than a lot of people actually know that it does. Right. So I commend the work that you guys are doing at Nate, and I appreciate you taking a few minutes to stop by and chat with me.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. I'm very happy you gave me the platform to talk about this. Most people ask me about social shopping or payments, and I really wanted to get this out, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go, Carlos, do you want to just give us a quick shout out for the next show this week? I think we only got one more.
Absolutely. Well, one more confirmed. There might be another one on Friday, but I'll save the details for when it's already confirmed. But anyway, what we do have is, as you can see down below, we have tomorrow we're going to be speaking with Steve Milo, the CEO of V-Trips, a travel tech company. Then going a little bit ahead, Eddie, I'm going to go ahead and into next week just to get people ready for this. We're going to be
get the word out,
Monday.
man.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I said,
what?
Get the word out.
Yeah, get the word out. Exactly. So Monday, November the 28th, it's Joe Buffoni, the co-founder of Annexus Health tech company. Finally, on Tuesday, that'll be with November the 29th with Ben Moataz, the CTO and founder of Stivits. That's all we have for next week.
All right. Thanks, Carlos. Thanks again, Albert. Hope you have a good evening. We'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Thanks, guys.